Welcome back, everyone, to the second in our series of Thriving in the Times of COVID-19 presented by the Our Lady Star of the Sea Healthcare Ministry. We would like to provide you with resources to increase resilience and decrease anxiety during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've chosen to do this in a virtual platform so that we can reach more of you in our community and the information can be easily accessed after the program. Tonight, we have three great topics to help you: using prayer as a resource, how to deal with depression and anxiety, and also support for substance abuse disorders during the COVID-19 pandemic. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Sister Joan Gabbin, who will be helping us support ourselves with prayer. Sister Joan?
Thank you, Megan. God is close, a reminder in the midst of global pandemic. We would talk about what is it going to look like when this is over? When this is over, may we never again take for granted the handshake with a stranger. When this is over, may we never forget the conversations with our neighbors. When this is over, may we never again take for granted a crowded theater, a Friday night out, the taste of communion, a routine checkup, the school rush each morning. When this is over, may we never again take for granted coffee with our friends, the stadium roaring, each deep breath, a boring Tuesday, life itself. When this is over, when this ends, may we find that we have become more like the people we wanted to be. When this is over, may we become what we were called to be. When this is over, may we be what we hope to be. And may we stay that way, better for each other because of the worst. When this is over, may God continue to bless all of us. May God continue to keep us safe. May God continue to show us his love when this is over. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Joan. We really appreciate you being here to support the community. If you we'll send links to these slides as well that have the live links on them so that you can access that YouTube video again if you'd like to. I think it's really beautiful. Okay, so we're going to move on to Kathleen and Gary, who will be talking about mental health. I'm going to mute myself and Sister Joan and Gary so that Kathleen can move forward. And Kathleen, just say next slide when you're ready, and I'll move it forward for you.
Okay, you ready? So I'm Kathleen Patno, a licensed counselor, and I work with St. Vincent's in behavioral health, and I'm a member of the Our Lady Star of the Sea Parish. I'm here to talk with you about thriving in these times of COVID-19 and knowing that we're all affected in body, mind, and spirit in this, and specifically talking about support for your mind. So we're all very familiar with the challenges during these times. There's trauma and fear over widespread disease, and everyone experiences trauma differently, especially if a person has a history of traumatic experiences earlier in life, but we all feel it during this time. There's grief over not being able to see family and friends, in addition to just not being able to see them and be with them. There are real losses, and there's the whole experience of introverts versus extroverts in these times, where extroverts need people, get energy from people, and introverts are more okay with fewer people interactions, but everybody experiences the feeling of disconnection during this time. The losses of life, of jobs, of freedom and ease to go and do. And there's certainly a time of political and societal unrest, which is additionally concerning at this time. There's the fear of getting sick, different practices of safety and vulnerability of immunocompromised selves and loved ones, unprecedented physical distancing with the lack of hugs and handshakes, financial concerns, we lose that sense of community, and sometimes can have that inability to get to caregivers, fear of going to the doctors, inability to be with family at the hospital or skilled nursing facility. Relationship challenges are part of these times too. Both that distancing, but also sometimes too much togetherness, which can escalate tension, even violence, and juggling home, school, and work, and being cut off from others, that isolation. And certainly a turning to unhelpful coping mechanisms, addictions, and unhealthy behaviors. Next slide, please. So some basic definitions of anxiety and depression. Anxiety is that feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, a sense of being unsettled, wary of what will happen next. Anxiety is an emotion characterized by those feelings of tension, just general worry, and physical changes, which I'll talk about a little bit. And it's also a clinical diagnosis, a nervous disorder that features a state of excessive just apprehension and uneasiness. And depression can be a severe despondency and dejection, a sense of hopelessness and lethargy. And it can affect how we think. It's a negative way of looking at the world. And it really affects everything, how we act and how we think. And it's a mood disorder that has that persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. Often these two can coexist, and I want to talk more about the specifics of each and look at some symptoms that you might experience. So, and you'll see some of these symptoms and manifestations on both lists for anxiety and depression, because they do coexist and kind of overlap. But anxiety involves worry. A lot of the worry that plays out are what ifs and spinning negative scenarios about what might happen. There's a restlessness, a feeling, people describe it as like a motor running inside, and it's hard to relax. Nervous and fidgety, it's hard to focus. Substance abuse, and it's the obvious alcohol and drugs, but also spending and turning to unhealthy behavior, eating, and can be a lot of different things that people turn to with anxiety. And suicidal ideation can be part of anxiety and also depression. And I'll speak more about that in the depression slide, but it can lead a person to that sense of this, it's just too hard to live in this life, in this, with this extreme anxiety. Catastrophizing is also a thing, which is, you know, things get big and bad fast, assuming the worst from the get-go. Anger and irritability, there's an easy annoyance and that fight or flight. Either people shut down or they're kind of ready to interact in an agitated way. Certainly scared, a lot of fear and foreboding. Often there's sleep disturbance with anxiety, either too much or not enough. Often with anxiety, it's hard to either get to sleep or stay asleep. And certainly stress across the board in relationships and with family, work, school. And physically, what people experience with anxiety is shortness of breath or hyperventilation, increased heart rate, sweaty, chest or stomach pain, twitching hands, headache. So it's very physical as well with anxiety. Next slide. And with depression, and sometimes people get depressed because of their anxiety. But with depression, there's an apathy, a kind of a sense of why bother. And with depression also, there's an isolation, a pulling away from friends and family. Again, that inability to focus. Substance abuse is here as well. And just to talk a little bit more about suicidal ideation. It's one thing to feel like, I just hope I don't wake up, and that kind of sense of it's all just too much. And it's another thing to have a plan and some sense of an action that goes with that feeling. It's important to ask a loved one if they're considering that option. It doesn't plant a seed, but it allows for a dialogue to happen around this topic. And if someone you love is feeling that way, or you are, you know, there's a suicide hotline, a national suicide hotline that you can Google. It's also, I'll just name it, 1-800-273-8255. There's also a way you can text to the National Suicide Hotline by texting the word HOME, HOME, to 741-741. And that can connect you to a counselor 24/7. Also, if someone is suicidal and has a plan, go to the nearest ER, call 911, and get as soon as possible to a professional. So those are things we take very seriously, of course. Also with depression, that annoyance can be part of it, and anger and irritability, and a sadness, kind of a pervasive heaviness that doesn't feel like things are going to get better, and a hopelessness, as well as some of those, the sleep disturbance and the stress and the disordered eating and drinking. So for the next slide, so those are all the problems and what can be in the mix. So here are some solutions and some support for your mind. It's important in these times, especially, to develop a schedule and maintain a routine. It's different and it's kind of upended from the normal schedule and routine, but it's really important to establish one, to have a sense of boundaries around time that actually helps promote good mental health. Certainly staying connected in a safe and virtual way. And there's people talk about it in terms of physically distanced, but socially connected. And I think that's really important through online options, Zoom, virtual groups and experiences and church services, and getting outside, just being in nature, which I'll talk about it in a little later. Finding simple sources of joy, just noticing the small things. Mindfulness practices can also support your mind in these times. And mindfulness, if you Google it, there's a lot of ways you can practice mindfulness, and some of them are included on this list. But really what mindfulness is about is being fully present in the moment. And any way that you can do that, it just creates some inner peace. And it's a good practice to develop. Limiting the consumption of news. Certainly checking in, but not staying too long, getting a good balanced view as much as possible, because there's just a lot of disturbing news out there, and we can get kind of disturbed by it. Having a gratitude practice is actually an evidence-based treatment and support for health, mind health. And that consists of simply writing down 3 gratitudes a day, and writing it down is part of the practice. It's 3 gratitudes, call it 3 blessings, 3 what went wells every day, and they have to be different every day, different gratitudes every day, and that can be just really helpful to set a mind in a direction of looking for things that are going well and positives. Meditation is helpful as a mindfulness practice, but meditation and contemplation, just cultivating silence, Lectio Divina, guided online meditations that can be just very helpful for calming. Eating a mood-boosting diet, which limits sugar and alcohol, and I know Megan talked a lot about that in her presentation. And self-care of body, mind, and spirit, whatever that is for you. Sleeping well is very important for a healthy mind. And there's really some disciplines around sleep that can be helpful. Certainly in addition to things like limiting caffeine and alcohol, it's having a kind of consistent time for getting up in the morning and going to sleep at night, having rituals around going to sleep. Perhaps if you decide you're going to go to sleep at 10 p.m., at 9:30, have a cup of tea, start reading a book in bed. There's a whole kind of set of healthy practices around sleeping well. Getting help is professional help is very important. And virtual help is available right now, which is a wonderful thing. Cognitive behavioral therapy is an evidence-based treatment for both depression and anxiety and can be very effective. And there is a Catholic therapist network in this diocese, as well as many other resources in the community that can offer that help. And a lot of people are seeking it right now. Simple breathing. There's a calming breath that you can do that manages anxiety in a powerful way, and it often is underestimated. And it's not just the kind of superficial breathing, it's that deep kind of diaphragmatic breathing. That is a slow inhale to a count of 5, a hold, and a slow exhale. And doing 3 to 5 of those kind of breaths, certainly whenever you feel triggered, but also just as an ongoing practice whenever it comes to mind, is really healthy for the mind. Moving is good. Some movement every day. It's one of the best treatments for depression and anxiety. I know Melissa talked about this in her presentation in detail, and it doesn't have to get fancy. It can just be walking. But it is very healthy for the mind as well. Looking at inspiring books, movies, podcasts, TED Talks, and looking at anybody that inspires you, humorous or just encouraging messages. Praying, as Sister Joan talked about, is certainly a resource for us as people of faith, and is the bedrock of all of this, all of these practices for healthy mind. Getting outside cannot be stated enough, especially now that it's a little cooler now. And no or moderate alcohol, and in general. And medication is prescribed by a physician. Medication in conjunction with therapy is the best evidence-based treatment for anxiety and depression. And there are many more practices, but those are some of the highlights I have to share with you today. And now I'll turn it over to Gary to go into some depth on substance abuse.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. Gary, I'm going to mute all of us except for you, and you can tell us a little about your background and then use me as your director to move your slides. I'm trying to unmute you. Unmute. Gary, on your screen, do you see a little microphone? If you hover over the screen, could you? There you go. Now we can hear you. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And Kathy, that was excellent. To be perfectly honest with you, you made my job a whole lot easier. I'd like to start my presentation, Living with Substance Use Disorders During a Pandemic, with a little prayer. Heavenly Father, give me strength, wisdom, courage, and desire to say no to my addiction so that I may see, follow, and lead others to the one true light. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. My name is Gary, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. My last drink, quite honestly, was taken on August the 13th, which happened to be a Friday, 1982. So for 38 years, I've been alcohol free. I tell people that aren't in recovery that, and they say to me, well, you got it licked. You don't have any problems with a pandemic or isolation or anything like that. I beg to differ. I have the same problems and the same concerns and the same issues dealing with relapse and drug use as anyone else does. So what I would like to do is divide this presentation into three parts. The first part is to just pretty much look at the pandemics. Give you some history of pandemics, where we've been in the past, and then to also look at COVID-19, which is the one that we're in right now. So if I could have the next slide, please. Oh, you already have it. Thank you. Pandemic is really an epidemic of an infectious disease, very large proportions spread across several continents, possibly worldwide, and it's affecting a large number of people. It's really nothing more than a very large epidemic. There are a lot of people who use pandemic to describe other things, such as violence in the streets, for example, or but violence in the streets. We'll leave it at that. Numbers of homeless individuals is another example of it, and I had to catch up onto my reading here. And then the pandemic, and also substance use disorder, the persistent use of drugs, including alcohol, despite the substantial harm and the adverse effect that it may have. If we could have the next slide, please. These are some of the examples of the pandemics in the past. All pandemics are a little different from one another. They're not the same. Some are more dangerous than others. Some are more deadly than others. And some, quite honestly, will have a lasting effect on our world, as is COVID-19. What are they saying now? It's the new normal. I believe that's it. But if you look at the slide, you see the Great Plague of Milan. There was 1 million people that died. Hong Kong flu, 1 to 4 million. The third plague of China, 12 million. HIV/AIDS, and that's kind of interesting because that is still considered, to a degree, a pandemic, even though it's kind of spread over. It's pretty much more epidemic proportions than pandemic proportions, but it's still considered a pandemic. 25 to 35 million. If I could have the next slide. You see the Spanish flu. Spanish flu is kind of interesting. as I understand it, there was roughly 500 million people infected with the Spanish flu back in the 1918, 1920 time period. There was 500 million, which roughly represents a third of the population back then, and then there's 40 to 50 million people that died. If you look at the Black Death back in the 1300s, you'll see 200 million people died. And then, of course, there's coronavirus, COVID-19, which is from 2019, which is how it got its name, COVID-19, to present. I believe that Megan, you had one of your slides that gave data on that. If we could have the next slide, and this one, you'll see that these numbers are considerably or significantly lower than what was reported on your slide. That's because these numbers came from September the 8th of 2020. What I wanted to point out on this slide, Florida, St. Johns County, Duval County. As you can see, these numbers are still a little lower. Like Florida now is over 700,000 confirmed, and there's considerably more than 12,000 deaths since then. But anyways, as you can see, there's quite a few people that are infected, and it's still early in the pandemic. It's probably still looked upon as being the first wave, maybe into the second wave in some areas, but for the most part, it's the first wave. So if we could have the next slide. A lot of experts, subject matter experts, are saying that COVID-19 is on track for being the worst pandemic ever in some of the medical community. They've been making this suggestion. States the reason that since we're still in the middle of the pandemic, it's pretty hard to determine that, but that is what people are saying. Signs and symptoms of use, misuse, and abuse. Pretty much the same thing. Use, I'm going to give you an example. Use, I go to the doctor, I've got a backache, I've tried NSAIDs, they haven't worked. And so the doctor prescribes something stronger, maybe an opiate, maybe oxycodone, oxymorphone, whatever it is. This is not going well. But in any event, doctor prescribes it, and say he prescribes every 8 hours for 3 days. That's 9 tablets. He'll give you one more day, he gives you 12 tablets. You take it to the pharmacy, you get it filled. You take it, maybe you take it 3 days, maybe you take it 2 days, but you don't need it. You don't need to use all of it. So you decide to go to an NSAID like Tylenol for the rest of the time. And you take that, now you're supposed to turn that back over to the pharmacy. But do you? Probably not. Probably you'll put it in your medicine cabinet just in case you need it some other time. So that's use. Misuse is now you've got a sprained ankle and you've got this drug, this Oxycontin, oxycodone, whatever it is, you've got it in your medicine cabinet. So you go to the medicine cabinet, you start taking it for your sprained ankle. Now, the doctor could order it for a sprained ankle if it was serious enough, but you didn't go to the doctor because you already had it. So you're taking something for a quasi-legitimate reason, but you didn't get it from the doctor. It wasn't a legitimate prescription. That's misuse. Abuse is when you, it's when you no longer are taking it for a legitimate reason. You need it to function. It's becoming an addiction. And so that's the difference between the three. The behavior, change of behavior, the mood swings, isolation, poor work performance. You know, I know people, quite honestly, that display those behaviors, and it's not because they have a drug use or a misuse. It's not because, it's just the way they are, their behavior. So you have to be careful when you say, well, I've noticed these things, so apparently the individual is taking a drug. That's not necessarily true, so you have to be careful about Let's look at the next slide if we could. Side effects by drug type. So we've got cannabis, marijuana. And in addition to what's up on the screen as far as what some of the side effects are, cannabis is known to increase the heart rate. It's also known to cause problems with the respiratory system. Hence, you can develop things like asthma, or it might aggravate asthma, bronchitis, emphysema, COPD. And long-time cannabis use can lead to suppressed immune system, which opens up the door for numerous diseases and infections. And since it does affect the respiratory system and the heart, it also is possible that you're more susceptible to contracting COVID. And when you contract COVID and you have all of these respiratory problems, it's going to be a serious problem. Opioids, morphine, codeine, fentanyl, Percocet, Oxycontin, painkillers. And obviously there's legitimate reasons to take these medications. And quite honestly, it's perfectly possible to experience withdrawals, slight as they may be, once you stop taking these. Let me tell you something about opioids. Sometimes you like the way you feel when you take an opioid, when you take something like that. It makes you feel relaxed, chilled out, good. And so you have to be careful. And when you no longer need the drug, or when you try to stop taking the drug, you might want to consider contacting your physician or a reputable treatment facility to assist you in reducing your need or dependence on an opioid. Next slide is on stimulants. Stimulants, speed, amphetamines, Ritalin, methamphetamines, crystal meth, cocaine, crack. They all, again, affect the heart rate. They affect your the overall body temperature. They are sometimes referred to as diet pills. They also are used for, as part of the diet pill reputation that it has, it's used for weight loss and controlling appetite. In addition, today it's used for ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and ADD, which is attention deficit disorder, as well as narcolepsy. Students and a lot of workers, and especially truck drivers, I shouldn't say especially, but truck drivers, they take stimulants to increase their performance and their alertness. And there's always those individuals who are in search of that high, that euphoric feeling that once they get, they'll never get it again. You only get it once. And in order to get it, they try to get it, they take more and more, and they have a risk of overdosing and death. And then CNS depressants, sedatives, tranquilizers, hypnotics, barbiturates, phenobarbital, benzodiazepines, Librium, Valium, Klonopin, Xanax, alcohol. These are sometimes referred to as downers, and they're used in treating anxiety, panic attacks, acute stress reactions, sleep disorders. They also affect the blood pressure and heart rate and respiratory system. So again, you need to be careful about taking them and take them only as prescribed. So many of these drugs, as I said, they all have good use, they all have use. But some of them are easier, or it's more easy to develop an addiction or dependence on some of them than it is on others. Many subject matter experts have stated concerns regarding COVID-19 and the fact that many individuals are turning to drugs and alcohol as a means of controlling the feelings with regard to self-quarantining, social distancing, boredom, etc. But the fear is that some of these individuals will be dealing with the substance use disorders brought on by these drugs and by the alcohol long after COVID-19 is over. In a survey conducted by Recovery Village, there was a noted substantial increase in drug and alcohol consumption, most notably alcohol, followed by marijuana and opiates. Go to the next slide. I would appreciate that. Dealing with substance use disorder during a pandemic event. I'm going to read something. It's a little narrative that I put together when I was thinking about what to present. Imagine going to bed one night thinking life is great. Maybe it's not so great, but it's good. And you get up the next morning, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, and you say to yourself, what a perfect morning, as you pour your first cup of coffee and turn on the news. All of a sudden, not so perfect. We're talking about a new flu. But they say it's nothing to be too concerned about because it's on the other side of the world. It's over in China. So you go about your business. But what we now know is COVID-19 is a big deal. Then it seems as if by overnight, this COVID-19 went worldwide. Cases are being reported throughout the United States, millions of cases, hundreds of thousands of deaths. Businesses closing, hospitals overrun, ERs and ICUs filled to capacity, shortage of ventilators, personal protective equipment, coronavirus tests, and vaccines not yet available, shortages and more shortages, store shelves empty, no paper towels, antiseptic wipes, hand sanitizers, gloves, cleaning supplies, toilet paper, masks, wear them or not. They can't make up their mind. One day it's yes, and the next day it's no. Social distancing 6 feet apart, more businesses closing, schools, restaurants, fast food chains, mom and pop stores, major corporations, all impacted by COVID-19. Many closed, some never to reopen. Work from home, don't work, unemployment running out, bills not being paid. But don't worry, it'll be over. It'll be over soon, maybe in 2 weeks or so. So you say to yourself, I can wait that long. 2 weeks go by, no relief in sight. 1 month, 2 months, 6, still no relief, or in some cases, too little, too late. All of these things run through your mind. Your anxiety level is through the roof as you lay awake, unable to sleep, thinking, it can't get any worse. But it can get worse if you're an addict. Next slide. Nope, stay there. Oops, back up. I'm sorry. Social isolation and sheltering in place. It's essential for the control of COVID-19, but it also causes great concern for an individual who's in recovery or is addicted to alcohol or drugs and they're not in recovery yet. Susceptible to infections. As I explained earlier, the negative adverse effects on an individual's lungs and hearts make that individual susceptible to all sorts of disorders, and in particular, those that, such as COVID-19, any of the flus, any of the respiratory ailments, related mental health issues. Kathy, I think, did a good job with that. There's mental health issues, they're always of concern, but during a pandemic where so much is disrupted, issues such as stress, anxiety, and depression will often lead to misuse of a prescribed medication. Coping with stress. Stress often leads to relapse, so it stands to reason coping with stress is important in relapse prevention. Proper diet and exercise, plenty of sleep, they're all helpful in dealing with stress, as are less TV, radio, and news. Read more, pray or prayer groups, visit with and or check in on one another. Anything to take your mind off what's causing you stress. It's easier said than done, I know, but it's kind of important. Drug rebound effect. That's kind of an interesting one. When you stop taking a drug, especially if it's something that you've taken for a long period of time, you're going to affect or experience, you're going to experience a rebound. Basically what that is if you think of your life, you've got two parallel lines and you operate somewhere on a day-to-day basis within those. Yeah, there'll be a day when you get a little happier. Yeah, there'll be a day when you feel a little sad. But quite honestly, if you stay within that range, you're normal. It's normal. It's normal for you. Well, then you say one night you get home, you had a particularly bad day, and you have a couple of drinks to settle down, to chill out, to relax. And say it drops down. If you look at these two parallel lines, the center of it being 0 and the rest above 0 is +1 to 10 maybe, and below 0 is -1 to 10. So you take a couple of drinks and it brings you down to, say, a -2, which is kind of nice. It's relaxing. Well, when you stop drinking, when you stop taking that drink, you're going to go up, but you're not going to go up just to 0. You're going to go up above 0. You're going to experience the opposite effect of what it was that you experienced when you were taking that particular drug. And so that's something you need to consider. And then when you start going down, now you're down at 2, now you want to stay at 2. Because when you go up above, remember, you're going to feel a little bit anxious and a little bit excited. So you take a little more. Then then -2 becomes your normal, sort of speaking. And then you go a little lower, and a little lower, and a little lower. And at some point in time, you will experience something called death. That's about what it amounts to. So that's the rebound effect. Relapse, according to the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which is NIDA, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the people in recovery will relapse. Individuals in recovery need to avoid triggers whenever possible. Stinking thinking. Just one drink won't hurt. Isolating from others won't hurt. Missing meetings won't hurt. Hanging around with the old gang won't hurt. Well, I can assure you that it does hurt. I said at the beginning that I was an alcoholic in recovery. So here I'm going to relate to you something that happened to me on more than one occasion. I tried that, just one drink won't hurt. I had stopped drinking. It was about a month. I was into it for about a month. And I was hanging around some guys that I used to hang around with, bowl with. And they stopped at a bar after we bowled. We stopped at one of the local bars. And guys said, well, come on in, Gary, and have a drink. And I said, well, I'll come in, but I won't have a drink. So I went in, and they had a drink, and they were playing pool, and I had a Diet Coke. Well, then the guy said, he cracked open, I want to say it was black velvet. But he said, taste this tastes great. So I put it to my lips, and I knew when I put it to my lips, quite honestly, that it was a big mistake. And it was. From that, I went to one beer. And from one beer, I went to a couple of beers. And it wasn't long before I was right back to where I was drinking anywhere from a 6-pack to a case of beer a day, and anywhere from a pint to maybe a half quart of whiskey a day. So yes, relapse is serious, and it can happen to anyone. I've been clean and sober for 38 years, but I'm as likely to relapse as anyone else if I just fall into that trap of stinking thinking or any of the other traps that I mentioned. So, it's very important to, because you don't want to let yourself down. You don't want to let others down. You get a sense that you feel guilty. You experience depression. So you need to just avoid it altogether. And in a COVID situation where you're locked down and you're feeling depressed already, and geez, I'll just have a drink and that'll help me feel a little bit better. And maybe it will, or you know, I'll have a joint and it'll make me feel better, and maybe it will. But at some point in time, you're going to regret it. Drug withdrawal, every drug is different. Different symptoms, different durations of withdrawal, different severity. Experiencing withdrawals isn't easy at any time. During a pandemic where individuals are sheltered in place and access to care may be limited, treating withdrawals can be tricky and in some cases extremely dangerous. I would suggest before stopping taking a drug, especially if it's something you've been taking for a long period of time, or especially if it's something that you're taking high doses of, I would recommend that you would contact your local physician or your physician or a treatment center or someone for medical advice as to how to best go about eliminating or stop taking the drug. The next slide, what can I do if I know of someone who has a substance abuse disorder during a pandemic? You know, we've learned a lot during COVID-19. Still have a lot to learn, but we've learned a lot. And we should use what we've learned to plan for future events, because we know without question that there's going to be another pandemic at some point in time, or another event that separates us from the people around us. Look at the people out in California that's suffering through the fires as an example. So we should plan in advance. We should gather our resources and make sure we've got plenty of them on hand. We know we need masks and gloves, hand sanitizers, antiseptic wipes, over-the-counter medications to assist with side effects and prescription drugs. If we are in a methadone program or Suboxone, and we need to make sure that we don't want to be going out to a clinic every day because we have a compromised immune system. So the best thing to do is see if we can't work out an arrangement where we can take some of the medication home. Can't take enough home to get through 6 months like we've been in, but you can take it home maybe for a couple of days at a time and limit the number of times that you have to go out into the community to get your medicines. And then there's things like magazines and books, DVDs, games. Figure out what is the best way to cope with the stress brought on by these lockdowns. And then know what you're dealing with. Know the drug or drugs that you're dealing with. Make a list of the signs and symptoms you've observed and jot down any questions that you may have for the doctor. And then call the doctor. Or the drug treatment program if you're in a program, or a qualified professional. If you have a counselor that you're dealing with, call and discuss with them any of the issues that you've been brought up and any of the questions or concerns that you had at that time. If you're not in recovery or if you're not in treatment, know where you can get treatment if you need it, if you decide you're going to get treatment, or know what's available and how to access it. And then communicate with others around you, communicate with the doctors, the therapist, your sponsor, if you have a sponsor, communicate with your pastor, your family, check in on one another, and take care of yourself, spirit, mind, and body. And has been demonstrated in the last with Sister Joan and with Kathy. It's extremely important. And as with Megan and Melissa, it's extremely important to take care of yourself. That concludes my presentation for this evening, and wish you all a very blessed day, and hope this is of some benefit. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. On the slide in front of you now, you'll see some really great resources. And again, we will find a way to get the presentations distributed so that you have access to all of this information. The links may not be, quote, hot, so to speak, but you can at least type them into your browser and find those resources. I would just really like to take a moment to thank our whole crew of people that worked on this, the healthcare ministry from Our Lady Star of the Sea. We've been meeting regularly during the pandemic and are really hopeful that this is going to be a good resource for you. Please feel free to share it with others, and God bless you and your families. Thanks so much for being with us. Here's our information if you need to reach us. Thanks.